afternoon and welcome to the SIP. Your SIP host, Judith Brown Dianis from the Advancement Project, Fatima Goss Grays from the National Women's Law Center, Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, and I'm Glenda Carr from Higher Heights. Tracy Sturdivant will be back with us on Sunday. And today is Power Hour Lunch with your SIP host. And we are doing all things summer review, mourning the loss of summer, and a preview of the next 55 days. How are y'all counting election days? We on 55, 54? Depends on how you count it. Either way, it's around the corner. Look, Fatima's like, what? And
election day it's now. People have started, it's now. Let's go.
Yep. New York ballots are being mailed this week. Well, absentee ballots applications are being mailed this week, so look out for it. And so to kick us off is Adrian, I think.
Yes, it is. So I think we want to first, before we get started in our summer review, ask people to tell us where you are watching from. As Glenda always says, we are in the same spots. Tell us where you're at in terms of your city and where you're watching from in the house. And then, as always, we want to share this. This is our power hour on Wednesdays to support each other and talk about what's going on. So share the either do a watch party or share the feed with your friends. And so we're going to do a little bit of a review. So I feel like in June, I was the person leading this discussion about how we were halfway through 2020. Which was a shocker, both because it felt like it came really quickly, but it also felt like we had been in 2020 for 700 years. And so now here we are through the summer. And at election day, depending on where you are, I know people in North Carolina got their ballots, many of them, and are probably filling them out. And then we have a number of days, 55 or 54, to the end of voting. And so things are both, again, feel like they're flying by, but also going at a snail's pace because we live in hell. So I'm gonna just start us off by thinking about all that happened this summer. There was so much, both grief and trauma and inspiration and hope in many ways. But really the summer was defined by this summer of unrest. We saw uprisings across the country as a result of police killings. We saw communities of every kind and every shape showing up to protest the killing of Black people and declare Black Lives Matter. And so Judith, you want to just remind us, talk us through sort of what happened and over the course of, it's not over, right? Which is the other.
Pretty incredible and right, like multiracial, where we see a lot of white allies in the street, Asian folks, Latinx folks, all saying Black Lives Matter. And I think, one of the things that we also should acknowledge is that we have seen some wins and some victories as a result of some of the protests and the uprisings in cities, including some cuts to some of the police budgets in several cities, and the removal of police from schools in several cities. And while we're seeing this, at the same time, we're seeing a fight over like the power of the police. And the protests have been, even peaceful protests have been met with aggression by the police. And I think that in part, this is like one of those things where the police are feeling like we're gonna show you who's in power. And so peaceful protesters are getting tear gassed and the rubber bullets, and people are really getting messed up out in those streets.
Well, then there's the flip side to that, Judith, too, which is the petulance and childishness of law enforcement, where we see them sitting inside of Congress members' offices with their feet up on the desks, while there is you know, unruliness happening in the streets, or, you know, hanging out in libraries, or whatever it is, the sort of childishness, well, if you don't like us, then we're not going to do our jobs.
Right, intentional like slowdowns of service, etc. But I want to also acknowledge a few of the shootings that have happened. More boy from DC who was shot in the back by the police in DC, and so it continues. And I think that's the really troubling thing, that is in the midst of us fighting against it, it continues. And it's like, have you learned nothing? And at the end of the day, we know that no, they have not learned anything, and that it's not about bad apples, but it's the whole damn orchard and the roots and a system. And so we're gonna keep fighting. That's our summer in review. We're gonna keep fighting. The protests have been successful in some victories in some places, but it's not over. We're gonna keep keeping on.
Yeah. Fatima or Glenda, your thoughts on our summer of unrest?
You know, I was actually talking to a younger activist recently who and first time activist, first time in the streets, who I think was like, wait a second, it's not done. We're like, I've been in the streets all summer long. And I think, Judith, it's good to have giving a longer range perspective, because what I hear you holding is both frustration, right? Well-earned and long-earned frustration, but seeing some glimmers of hope in both the movement and in the wins. And so there have been wins. They have, you know, the system itself has not been entirely upended. There have been cultural wins too, both sort of, the thing that got me this summer was the cultural win around athletes joining in this fight. Yeah. I mean, when hockey was like, put me in, and for Black Lives, I was like, what is happening? And I don't know if you guys have been following Naomi Osaka and her drive and her calm as she manages to, you know, go out there and slay on the court. And, you know, she is so young. And then the confidence that she just wears those masks and bearing the names of people who we have lost. It is amazing to see her there. And she reminds me of all the young activists who I feel like their leadership we're following. She's, you know, other leading women in tennis who have been activists. You know, Naomi is modeling another way. And I say this as a Serena fan, like a Serena hard fan. There's a thing there.
Yeah.
And WNBA, let's not forget.
Oh, yes, we cannot.
Who before the NBA, back with, you know, with I Can't Breathe,
right?
Before the NBA, WNBA players stepping up in solidarity with the movement. And I think that's right, that the long term, right, is where we're going. Because the other thing to acknowledge is that we had a bill that was moved in Congress on the House side, and that has, of course, stalled on the Senate side because Mitch McConnell doesn't move any bills. That's not what he's there to do. He's there to move judges and not bills, unfortunately.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, Glenda, you have thoughts on that. I know we've talked about sports a couple of times. The thing about Naomi Osaka was, you know, she also went on strike, right? And did not play for a match. And then she put out this great statement where she was like, I'm this, but before all of that, I'm a Black woman. And so I was like, that was really heartening. And then to see her come out and wear the mask. And I know, Glenda, you've been talking about the WNBA also, but other thoughts on our long summer?
Yeah, well, lots on the long summer, but just to talk a little bit more about the sports. And so, you know, it's the second week of the US Open, which, you know, is a like most sporting events, not the cheapest thing to go to if you could physically go, right? There's definitely a level of income and a level of who goes to the US Open. And they're not playing, they're playing the US Open, playing with an empty Arthur Ashe Stadium. So one, it's the Arthur Ashe Stadium, and the legacy of the Black players of the tennis association is where Naomi, you know, is a extension too. So if you watch it, there's actually on the side court these they're doing like everyone, the little Zoom fans, and they have their boxes, are there people in their boxes. But if you pay attention this week, there's actually on the side court little murals of people in their like Black Lives Matter artwork.
No, I did not notice that.
Very subtle.
Wow.
And for the tennis, you know, the tennis, well, I shouldn't say that. The Tennis Association for the last several years has actually been headed by a Black woman. So I shouldn't say we should be surprised. She's moved the association through her administration. She's currently, I think her term is over, but something about, I think the way she led over the last several years have actually positioned the US Open. But frankly, like you said, if hockey is throwing down, girl, I just, and so that
did for real too.
It is the uncertainty of the moment. It is the, you know, at times how you are managing our own emotions. But at the end of the day, it is something about the first time activists, or to see one of my friends who literally say, like many people in America are not even couch activists, that they've taken, like left their quarantine homes to protest. That is something about expanding how people see themselves as activists, and how are they using their moment in the activism is inspiring.
I have one last thing to say on this, sorry, which is that I think that the difference also in this moment is because there are so many allies who have joined, and that there's kind of like this awakening for many people in our country, that the awakening is opening up opportunities to do radically more, you know, I guess radical, I shouldn't say radical, but reforms that are a little bit more radical than in the past, because this moment is questioning the legitimacy and the role of police in our society in ways that they've never been questioned before. And so that allows for us to do something different and to dream and envision about a new kind of safety that does not require the police to be involved all the time.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think people are definitely saying, I mean, you know, when Donald Trump tries to talk about and scare the suburban, you know, housewives, and he talks about whatever these protests are coming. The problem is that the protests were happening in the suburbs too, right? And there were no Black people involved, and it was the suburban housewives and their kids, right? And so it doesn't quite line up, right, with the image that he is trying to put out there. And so that is obviously one of the things that is absolutely defining this election. As we think about the issues that are playing into and sort of forcing, and I think Judith, this is to your point, forcing the people to take positions on this question that they might not have a year, 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, because of what we're seeing in terms of the historic numbers that were out in the streets protesting. But it is absolutely one of those defining issues that is, you know, causing people to look at this election in different ways, but also really making people reflect on their choices and what kind of country they want to see, and how the question of police accountability plays into what it is that they, you know, do or do not want in terms of where we go in this country. So Glenda, we absolutely saw this play out, right, during the two conventions. Right, the DNC and the RNC played out in wildly, you know, different ways, but it was one of the things that defined the conventions as well. The uprising, the call for racial justice, the call for, you know, interstructural racism helped to define those two conventions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we can agree on, there's two things. Adrienne might fall off her chair on the second one, wait for it, is that this convention had more Black folk on both sides. I was like, look at all these Black people on speakers, the most Black speakers ever, including the Democrats. And then the Republicans, like, where'd you find all these Black Republicans? But we digress. The other thing that, you had a convention that had to, for some, I mean, at the end of the day, both the Republicans and Democrats changed the way they had to do their conventions.
Mhm.
Democrats did it all virtual. Republicans, not so much, no masks. But this will forever change how how both parties will conduct their business. For those who actually made it through both of the conventions, and be clear, there was a struggle on both sides to get through.
My heart.
Is that at the end of the day, to hear my everyday like friends and family felt like they were people's convention. So if on the Democratic side of my friends who consider themselves Democrats felt that, I'm sure on the Republican side they felt that it was a participatory ability because they had to, instead of this being these elite conventions that people felt a part. Now, outside of what was said and how it was said, I do think it forever changes how people feel a part of this democracy. And there's a rising up on both extremes and both moderates. At the end of the day, there's one thing I did agree. This is where Adrian's going to fall off the chair. I absolutely agreed with Trump, was that he said in wasn't his acceptance speech, whatever that last night was, because he had already accepted the nomination, that this was the most important election in a lifetime. And I literally was like, yes, I agree, people. Do you hear him? It just depends on what you believe in your lifetime and why and what is at stake. Yeah.
He said it again. He said that again yesterday or something, didn't he? He was like, he was like, vote 17 times if you need to, because it's the most important election.
For me to stay in my home, as he called the White House.
Yes, right.
Home. It's not a house, it's a home.
Right.
And at the end of the day, the DNC, what we saw was, a historic moment of, Kamala Harris accepting her nomination and seeing all of that energy and excitement and pride that you saw from, her solidly standing on a stage as a Black woman, but carrying her multiple identities in that moment. And, you can never forever change that, regardless of what party affiliation or what you believe in, that there was something about that moment, particularly for women and young women, that is history making. And so now the work, the work beyond the convention is the work to organize and engage an American citizenry to figure out how they're going to vote in the next 55 days.
Yeah. Well, and that is the critical thing coming out of the conventions, right? Which is the challenges of voting right now. And I think we heard about, again, another issue defining the election that we also heard two different versions of. I'd say one grounded in truth and one grounded in delusion out of the two conventions. But it is another issue that is defining. And I think as we're moving close, as ballots dropped in North Carolina last week, they're starting to drop in other states over the next couple of weeks. Early vote will start. And people really are trying to understand what's the best thing to do. What's the best way to vote? How do I do this in a way that makes me safe, but also gets my vote counted? All those kinds of things that I think are also, sort of paving the way, right, to or through this long election process. And I know, Judith, you were talking about the work that Advancement Project is doing in trying to prepare for the sort of monitoring, right, and engaging with clerks that will have to happen to make sure that things are running as smoothly as possible, and sort of preparing grassroots folks and organizations to be able to play that role in an election that is so critical.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen up until now fights in court, one of which Advancement Project brought a piece of litigation in Florida, which was the first COVID voting case. But we've been seeing them across the country where there's just this desire on the side of people who want greater access to the ballot to make sure that states take the all of the steps that they can to make it easier for people to vote, and the other side pushing back on that, right? And so mostly Republican governors and Republican local election officials who are like, no, we're not trying to make it easy, actually, right? And so those fights have been about the things around access to vote by mail, whether or not there'll be drop-off boxes so you don't have to get out your car. And so we're going to see this fight is going to continue through the fall, where we will just be duking it out, and then also making sure that voters know, here's what you need to do. And I'm just going to say this: if you haven't ordered your ballot by mail, you should do so. I ordered mine in Maryland. Our governor, actually, they sent us absentee ballots. Everyone got one mail-in ballot for the primary, but the Republican governor, which was great of him, switched sides. For the general election, they're requiring that you request it. So these are the kinds of things that, first of all, create confusion, because you did it one way for the primary, now you're doing it a different way for the general, and make it harder for people. But at least in Maryland, for example, when we do vote by mail, I can actually get my ballot by email. So I don't have to wait for the Postal Service, because that's the other thing, right, that we saw, right? So it's ballot by email, and then I can mail it back or drop it, which is great.
Wow.
Which is what they do for military overseas and people living overseas. You get an email ballot, not a mail ballot. So all states should do that. But the thing that we also have to remember is that in the midst of all of this was the attack on the Postal Service, right? That's the whole summer has been around how this new postal master, who is a donor, can dismantle the US Postal Service by getting rid of the sorting machines, by taking away the mailboxes, you name it, this joker has tried to do it. Congress is trying to get on top of it, but a little late in the game.
Yeah, there is this, there is no state that is unaffected, right, by what is happening right now. And there are elections when we oftentimes will say it's happening in this region, it's happening in this state, but right now there is no state in the Republic, right, that this is not affecting. I was just looking in the comments, and we have someone joining from the Montana Racial Equity Project in Bozeman. And so I think that this is in Montana too, right? Like this has been a debate about whether or not and how people were going to receive their ballots. So I like this.
Also,
there is,
Adrian, the other thing that we didn't talk about is registration is down. Voter registration is
yes.
because a lot of people register in motor vehicle offices, public assistance agencies, and those offices have been closed. And the other way you get registered may be through an organization that does at your door or at the supermarket, and they've been shut down effectively because of the pandemic. And so the other thing we need to be making sure of is that people urge everyone to register before it's too late. And so you don't have a lot of time.
And verify.
Well, right. So one, check your registration if you're already registered, because you may no longer be on the rolls. So check your registration, get registered if you need to, and then verify. Fatima, I'm going to come over to you because I think that's, and I want to ask you to comment on the overall elections as well. But we also know that the sort of third thing that's been defining the election is actually the pandemic, right?
We are still in a pandemic.
We are still in a pandemic, which is why we are talking about vote by mail as much as we are. And so we've had this, we always say this, the Sept actually started as a response to the fact that we were all quarantined and we wanted to make sure that we had a way to stay connected to one another. And so this is how this little show that could came to be. But we've done a number of shows actually on the impacts of the virus, both on people's health, but also on economics, and obviously its effect on the election as well.
Yeah, when I think about this summer and what should have happened and what did not happen, it actually makes my blood boil because, you know, Congress went home on its recess and was gone most of August. And meanwhile, things like unemployment insurance benefits expired. They didn't, the Senate, you know, you talked about Mitch McConnell. He likes to joke about how he has this graveyard where legislation goes to die. Well, what happened is that the relief and support around the pandemic and the economic recession just sat in the McConnell graveyard. So it's been basically 3 months since the House passed the HEROES Act, which supported essential workers, provided money for states to support their elections, support for things like the post office and its functioning, but also really importantly, extended some of the things that were passed early on, like the additional unemployment insurance. When we first got in this pandemic, we didn't know how long. We were like, oh, we're going to gather. Let's do this for a few weeks. Is this going to be a month? Are we going to be like maybe 2 months? We are 6 months in. And the plans that were passed in March, April do not match the reality of today. And so Congress is back for a hot minute. And a hot minute, I mean, like, they're back for like 2 weeks. So all the important things in the world that need to happen, they better happen in the next couple weeks, including passing this critical relief package for funding for childcare, for schools, for unemployment, for healthcare, for state and locals that are near bankrupt. It is urgent, urgent time. So it's not gonna be enough to have a graveyard.
This is Trump's America.
It is. And that's, I mean, I think the other thing that we saw around this has been, we're at what, 6 million cases?
So listen, I actually just wanted to look up because, you know, the numbers go up every day. So I wanted, unfortunately, to be sure. It is 6.34 million. So I just want to, you know, that 3.4, that is 300,000 cases. And so I feel like we need to acknowledge those few 100,000 cases of coronavirus. And those are people who have tested. That's not asymptomatic people rolling around. And we're cutting close to 200,000 deaths.
Yeah, I saw something that said that we may have up to 500,000 deaths by January.
That is what they're predicting, because I just want to remind everyone, we are not in the second wave. The summer was supposed to be the time where across the country we flattened the curve and went down. And that didn't happen in the way that was predicted. So all the models are taking into account that this virus comes back.
Right.
And that it will come back on top of flu season. So the one thing that I want to say, the PSA that I want to say is that so important for people to get their flu shots.
Yeah.
They are out now. And I know that, people have been wondering, why is A connected to B? We have to think about what our health system is able to manage this season with a second wave. Right. And so they don't need to be dealing, hopefully, with a bad flu season on top of a second wave of COVID.
And did you see the article about the biker rally, the Trump biker rally?
Yes.
Which was Sturgis in South Dakota. There is a study that shows that there may have been about 250,000 cases of COVID-19 as a result of that biker rally.
All across the country.
That's right.
Because they came
they went back
all across. Right.
And so the college thing too, right? The college kids are going to school, they're sending them home with a positive, go back home. And so you're bringing it back home with you.
Right. So here is the thing, at this point, we know that there are some basic steps: masks, social distancing, outside, not inside, don't sing in my face. There are a bunch of things that they have learned about, but we still are seeing these events, the no mask events. We're still seeing the super spreader, on purpose super spreader events. where they're able to do these backlinks. My sister bumped into a protest over masks, just walking down the street, and they had signs that said, "I can't breathe."
Wow.
Mm.
Nope.
And they had a sign that said, "My body, my rights."
Nope.
A lot of effing nerve on that one.
Well, I think the other thing, I mean, when we talk about these unmasked events happening, intentional super spreader events, the terrible and tragic and, destructive lack of response from our government. And then we learned today from excerpts from Bob Woodward's book that in fact, the president of the United States, after saying to everyone publicly, it's not that big a deal, it's no worse than the flu, it's gonna go away, knew the entire time how dangerous it was, how wildly it would spread, and himself held campaign rallies, right? Himself, planned to do the convention more in person than it was, right? And so we just see the constant sort of not just incompetence, but sort of intentionally withholding important and critical life-saving information from the American public.
Why didn't they just go with MAGA masks from the beginning, making like MAGA masks cool? They would have sold out to people who wear the hats. I mean, it would have made money.
Yeah.
Because they're not as smart as you, Fatima, that's why.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, because he even today, still has the nerve. So now, we've got this vaccine research underway. And then they had to put it on hold. And they put it on hold because somebody got violently ill from it. And so he's still saying, well, they're just doing that because it's political, that they're putting the vaccine on hold and they're slowing it down. And he actually says, like, on November 4th, if I lose, they will reopen America. What?
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
No one's doing that. Glinda, what were you trying to get in here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My little green box isn't popping up. Oh, there we go. So at the end of the day, though, I need people to govern themselves accordingly, because you see y'all's friends, our friends on our social feed who have just been like, I'm over it. I'm like, are we going to day parties, Black people?
Right. Yeah.
It's outside. And so we haven't. So also govern ourselves accordingly. It is not over, people.
It's not over, and we are still disproportionately impacted in our community. I want to transition to a little bit of joy, maybe here before we move on, to transition to something that I literally know nothing about. So we were missing Tracy today because we need Tracy to be here to talk about all the versus battles that we saw over the summer as we recap the summer. I know that Glinda, you have watched some of them. I really, really wanted to watch the Brandy and Monica one, but I forgot and then I fell asleep. So I remember, but I was asleep for the historic battle.
There are the longest ever. I was like, oh, these are like 4 or 5, like, I can't go this long.
No, they had that many songs.
So Tracy, we will have to revisit when Tracy's on, because she hosts like little Versa watch parties with her crew. I think they've seen all of them. I started with Beanie Man because, I'm a Jamaican girl. And so I was just fascinated by that. And if you haven't watched it, like, people were clowning Beanie Man because he's still a thin man, but he had gotten his little old man gut. He's gotten that stomach tight. So go look and see, since Versa has made him a healthy man. But Monica and Brandy, soundtrack of many of us, and many of our, for some college years or young adult years, a young professional, depending on where you are in our spectrum. They did it at Tyler Perry Studio, so it was social distance. But for us, we're like, oh, they too close. Oh no, they didn't. Y'all, did y'all watch? It's the fascinating fact that they broke the original record. Yes. 1.2 million people watched, and if you watch it spiked to 1.2. But then it stayed 1.1 million viewers for over an hour. Wow. Come on, Sip watchers, we can do this too. Come on, get us to 1.2.
Yeah, we need to be at 1.2 million, even if it's only for 15 minutes.
Yeah. And so I'm actually fascinated by some of the cultural things that have happened because of COVID. And so Versa is a good example. I actually spend more time looking at videos. Black women click through more videos than the general population anyway, according to Nielsen's 2017 consumer report on Black women. But I think we are now more over indexing because it's just a release. Just like we are spending more time in these Facebook groups. So it is something about the organizing model. And at the end of the day, that we recognize the power of Black women, recognize now the power of Versa, that Kamala Harris popped on at a time where there was a million, right? And so
right. And Joe comes up as his like name, and everybody's like, "Oh, Simone, why you saying that, Simone?"
So it's the comments in the sex. It's also, I think, I get bored, but that's just me. But it's watching the comment and who's watching it, and that's a phenomenon that COVID is the great equalizer. So regardless of who you are, what you do for a living, if you're a celebrity or influencer, you're all at home and everybody is watching Verse at the same time. But this week, I'll tease it for Tracy Sturdivant. Come on, old school people. Did y'all see that the aunties, our aunties,
our aunties,
right? Like I'm like,
this Gladys Knight and Patti LaBelle on Sunday, honey. First of all, they're gonna sing for real, I bet. So we just gonna put that there.
Yeah, Patti is definitely singing.
So the other cultural thing that I think we should lift up, and I know that, I don't know if y'all are doing this, but you know that I am an avid TikTok watcher.
Oh, see, there you go, watching videos, Black woman.
Watching Black, that's right. And I just want to, okay, there's a lot of controversy around TikTok, etc., but it brings me joy, okay? So I still have it on my cell phone. And the level of creativity of Black folks is incredible. It is on display on TikTok. We have comedians, we have dancers, we have singers, we have political statements. It is hours of fun and joy. So, shout out to all the Black creators who are on TikTok, giving us joy.
Okay, so I'm gonna, Fatima, I know we had a lot to discuss actually in this little section on our culture, but I think we'll move on, and we'll need to bring this back up when Tracy's here to make her notable contribution to this conversation, and hand it over to you to talk about, what should we be looking to for the fall?
Well, it is almost fall, and so things that usually happen in the fall, some of them are happening, some of them are not, and some of them look dramatically different. Most of the country has now started back to school, and so I've already named that I have started my homeschool, distance learning, parenting, working full-time. And I gotta say that every morning I wake up like a little bit more angry about it. Like I wake up and I'm like, I can't believe that I'm doing this. And I actually think that feeling that like, I can't believe that I am here doing this is being felt. It's like an undercurrent that is brewing and brewing. Right. And so yeah, we're back, but colleges are opening up in 100 different ways with 100 different plans. Yeah. And some are super spreaders.
Yes, some are super spreaders. I mean, Judith, you should talk about your upcoming experience here, but so I have a college student and a high schooler, a senior in high school and now second year of college. And both, doing their classes from their bedrooms, without any real sense of, when things will be different. And, it is, when I think about the varied ways in which schools are trying to approach this, whether it's high school or it's, elementary school, so K through 12, or it's college, I agree with you, Fatima. I do think that there's a way in which there's this sort of, angry set of parents probably mothers mostly, but not all, who are going to show up to the polls with that, right? With that resentment, with that anger. And so when I think about, I'm actually fascinated by this whole Trump suburban thing, because I think the suburbs aren't really what he thinks they are. But I also think that there is a set of suburban moms who are at their wits' end, because they're not housewives. They got jobs, right? And so they're trying to manage the same thing that everyone else is trying to manage. And I think that people are going to be angry about it. And I think that, we saw the one college that, expelled some kids, a set of kids for not social distancing, and did not reimburse them their $36,000. So now if I'm a parent, right, and you took your behind to school, went to a party and you weren't supposed to, and then lost my $36,000, like now I'm really mad.
And by the way, $36,000. Can we just pause? That was one semester.
One semester.
Right. No, I think that was like, no. That was like a pre-freshman program. That wasn't even like a whole semester. That was a summer program. So yeah, so for me,
$36,000, I could not come. Well, I would have come home, but I don't know if I would still be alive.
Right.
You do know you wouldn't be. You would not be on the SIP.
No.
You would have never met me, because my mother.
No, you best to not come home.
And my father would just sat in the chair like.
But Judith, you also have a college experience that's about to start.
So we are headed off. I'm not going to say where we're going yet, because I don't want to say it until we get there and we make sure that we decide that we're still going. So we are heading out, and that's going to be an experience where it will be online classes, but living in a dorm, and that's because my daughter's an athlete, and so they have to be on campus and practicing, and I guess creating somewhat of a bubble for the athletes. But we will see. I mean, there have been a lot of schools. I have a niece who was off to college. She was packing her stuff, and the school, because the football players were positive, they told everybody, no, you ain't moving in. And then there are the schools that literally students got there and they told them, once the numbers started coming in, that they had to go home. That's a whole nother set of issues for families, because now you have to pay for your student to come back home. And all the parents who thought they were, they thought they were empty nesters, who are not empty nesters.
Right. That's my record room. That's where I'm working out.
That reminds me of that movie, Failure to Launch, when they got rid of Matthew McConaughey. The dad was like, this is my naked room. I'm naked in this room every day.
Moved on. Well, but Judith, it's interesting because you mentioned sports. So it sounds like your daughter's school is still proceeding with a plan for kids to play sports. But again, we've seen all sorts of rules. The NFL just came back.
Yep. It's interesting, because if you think about it, the one that has been able to actually manage it and manage it well has been the NBA. But the NBA, that's because they created a bubble. They created a bubble, and there was a point in time, it wasn't until I think maybe like a week, 2 weeks ago, that they allowed families to come, and only like a few people in the family could come, but they literally were in isolation. And so they have been able to carry this off without anybody getting sick. But the NFL is going to be different. They're not doing bubbles, and they have to, they're playing each other coming from different places. So we'll see how that plays out. Baseball did not do well with it. College sports, the problem with college sports is that the same kind of thing, you're coming from different areas. These schools, especially like the Southern schools, where we had COVID deniers, we have schools that are open. So my daughter's going south, and in the South, they're like, sure, let's play. But some of these schools have started their football seasons. They have no fans in the stands. I think it's a very short-lived thing, and that we're gonna see more students coming down with COVID, athletes coming down with COVID. For many of these schools, this is how they pay the bills. So they're like trying to push it because that's how the school lives. that and tuition. So I think, you know, and then high school sports, I mean, forget it. And which is horrible for the kids who actually want the scholarships, right? But I think a lot of schools, what they're doing, the public schools and for high schools, is that they're trying to push the seasons back. So you might see football happening in 2021. You might see basketball happening a little later in 2021. You know, with my daughter, I would not be surprised if we don't see a basketball season at all.
Right.
I mean, these kids who feel so connected to sport, where school is okay, but sport is the thing that gets them going every day. I worry about them and how we're going to keep them connected, because it could be that nobody's really playing for the rest of the year in big numbers. But that's one thing we'll be watching. The other thing in the fall is the election. So we're in the middle of it now, in my view. It started, people are voting, ballots are being requested, but there is an end date, right? There is an end date for voting. But
theoretically,
talk a little bit about what happens after that, because this is not gonna be a usual time where at 6 p.m. MSNBC says, countdown. They might say countdown to the polls close, but it's not going to be countdown to the answer.
And then be clear, even if there ends up being a margin to call the top of the ticket, it is actually these local elections that will go. I mean, just look at the primary in New York, for example. It was a month or so before all of the congressional races were called. And so I just want to share a little bit, Fatima, about the work that we do with Higher Heights. And so, not excited about the top of the ticket, but you're a Black woman watching this. Let me tell you a little bit about the numbers. There is a record number of Black women who filed and ran in 2020. In fact, it was 117 Black women that filed to run for the House. 89 Democrats and 28 Republicans. So we've had our final congressional primary. So we have 61 Black women on the ballot in November. That includes the 24 of the 25 Black women that serve in Congress. So Kamala Harris, who is also a sitting U.S. Senator, it was not up for re-election anyway. So what is amazing about this, there's an uptick of the number of Black women Republicans running. And so there's 48 Democrats, Black women running for the House, and 13 Republican Black women. And so if you're not, excited about all the ticket, look at some of these down ballot races, and these Black women who come from a variety of backgrounds. They're veterans, they're moms, they're teachers, they were PTA presidents, they were judges. And so, spend some time doing some research and discussion about not only the congressional races, but these local elections that are happening in your community that, frankly, many of them will be won or lost by even smaller margins than the top of the ticket.
Sheriff's races, don't forget sheriffs and prosecutors races, really important. And I just wanted to also, just to Fatima's point, is that we have to be prepared for the fact that we will not be able to call who is president on election night, right? And that there will be a narrative that there's fraud because we're not calling it. But what we really need is to make sure that every vote is counted. And that's going to take time because we will have mail votes. And there are some states that have extended the date so that they actually, if you are postmarked by election day, then that's enough. So then if US Postal Service is taking a long time, because they tried to dismantle it, then they're going to have to wait for those votes to come in. So we should just be prepared for that. But I also want us to be prepared for the fact that there might be a very slim margin of victory. Let's say if it's for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that the incumbent, the guy sitting in the White House, is not going to want to leave his home. And that will be a big problem and a potential constitutional crisis.
on top of the mini constitutional crisis we have faced in the last 4 years. So I would say that just when we think about the summer of discontent, right, that we just experienced and just talked about, that the other thing that people should be prepared for is to be in the streets. We need to be in the streets saying count every vote. Right, the election outcome should not be rushed for the sake of expediency and partisanship, right? Like we need to count every vote. And so people should also anticipate, demonstrations and, people saying, don't rush this election, count every single vote, make sure that every American's voice is heard. And I think that if we do experience a constitutional crisis in the way that Judith is talking about, we certainly as a nation will have to say there are things that we do and we don't do, and not having a peaceful transition of power is not a thing that we do. So I think that people should be prepared for the kinds of demonstrations that we've seen over the summer to continue if there is an attempt to rush to a decision on election night or even the day after.
And I would say also just make your vote plan and vote early, right? I had a major vote plan and my absentee application was sent to me. And then I realized, I was like, I didn't fill that out. And so I ended up voting in person on election day. But, most states vote early because those numbers get clocked early when they're voted early. And first day you can mail in your ballot. Let's not do what we all know we can do, which is like, I'll just wait for election day. And I'm speaking for myself. Vote early. Unlike Trump, we're not encouraging you to vote often. We're just asking you to vote early.
Because that would be illegal to do.
What? And your black butt will be caught.
Yes, for sure, absolutely.
The first ones to be caught.
Right. So, well, I would say that, Glenda, because the thing that I do is I get my ballot and then I say, I'm gonna get to it. Or, I don't know about that race. I'm a study. I'll wait until I get enough information. So what we shouldn't do this time, we should get our ballot. We should get the information we need. We should fill it out immediately, sign where we need to sign. If you're in a state that requires a witness, get a witness, right? And then mail it in or take it and drop it off at your clerk or at a drop box if your state has drop boxes.
Or we also like options, people, because the other thing is there are a lot of us who actually like to vote in person. If you are going to vote in person, vote during the early voting period, vote at low times where there's not a lot of people there to protect your health. But make sure that you stay in line for as long as you have to. Bring your food. If you need to make your own little picnic, make your own little picnic. Stay socially distant if you can. But use your options. Whichever way you feel comfortable voting is the way that you should do it.
Yep. And at the end of the day, the beauty of the investing in Black women in our vote is we don't vote alone. And so it is imperative that we organize everyone in our network, in our household to vote. In this cycle, I'm asking everybody how and who they voting for, but that's just me. But yeah, we should ensure, and particularly our seniors, to make sure that we are helping them think this through. And as you know, many of our seniors are going to want to vote in person. And so giving them the safest way for them to vote in person and figuring out their ride there and them coming so they don't have to stand in line for hours and encouraging them like you can vote early. So making a vote plan for the entire household and network.
Right. So do it early, get that plan, get your family. We're going to on it. I'm sure we will revisit this again. So as we head out, I'm hoping you guys can talk about any fall traditions that you have. I've been thinking about that. Well, there's one tradition that I have with my boys is that we go to those fall festivals and go apple picking and play in the hay. And then I make apple pie, which is like a feat because I hardly ever cook. And I'm not doing any festival. There are still in some places festivals I've seen, which I've been like, what are
Wow.
we doing? Um, but we need to get some apple pie. I might look for a very distant orchard where they could pick a few apples and then we'll run back to the car. Just enough for a pie, no more.
Everybody grab two and run.
I love Halloween. Halloween is a big deal in my house. And
Do not strike me as a Halloween person.
well, let me tell you, when we lived in Brooklyn, it was a big deal for our entire neighborhood. So every block, right, was done. So I love Halloween. And so I've been trying to think about, like, what will I do? Like, I can't be chucking candy at the kids, you know what I mean, from the door. So like with my gloves on. So I thought, well, I'll make individual bags and I'll put them out front and then they could just grab one and whatever. But cities are canceled. Los Angeles just canceled Halloween. Los Angeles canceled Halloween. So maybe there won't be a Halloween.
I told
last
my
time-
kids no.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll buy you candy and we could dress up at home.
And you can knock on the doors in each room and someone will open.
Oh, the pandemic that stole Halloween. Oh,
Halloween. I know. So I'm upset about that. But I mean, everything else we do in, sort of Thanksgiving and Christmas, you can make that work as a family unit, right? Even if you have big ones. But Halloween is the one that's like the communal kind of event.
Well, we're going to pick this conversation up on Sunday, and Tracy will be joining us, and I'm sure she has lots of ideas of what she's doing for the fall, including pumpkin carving. And so thank you for joining the SIP Power Hour Lunch. Your SIP hosts are Judith Brown Dianis from the Advancement Project, Fatima Goss-Graves from the National Women's Law Center, Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, and I am Glenda Carr from Higher Heights. Thanks for spending an hour as we looked back of a summer of uprest and organizing, and looking forward to a fall of mobilizing and organizing Black women and our networks to the polls. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.